Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Eriko Story, president of Dale Carnegie Tokyo Training Japan. My special guest today is an old friend of mine, Eriko Asai, who is the founder and partner now at Trinity. And congratulations on your new business. Maybe just for the audience's sake, just tell them what Trinity does, please.
Thank you very much. So you will notice the word Trinity means three in English. So I've just established this new company. Three of us. So I've formed this company with three trusted friends from my former employer. And it's three people from myself from Japan, and one from India, and one from Australia. We all worked at General Electric, GE. I was leading Japan. My friend Sam Maresh was leading GE Australia. And Mahesh Palashka was leading GE India. So we thought, we should get together because we love working with each other. We share values, and we set up this company to simply help bridge the businesses across Japan, Australia, and India. And we're just having a fantastic time leading our own business.
How long ago did you start the business?
Pardon?
How long ago did you start the business?
So all of us left GE at the end of June.
This year, June?
This year, June.
It's only a few months ago.
Yes. You may know that GE is going through a separation, and GE Healthcare has already been separated, and it's an independent company. And in a few months, the energy business will consolidate, and with a new brand, GE Vernova, it will be an independent company. And the remaining GE will be the GE Aerospace. So all of these company historical transition is happening as we speak. And we have been part of the corporate organization helping the company to separate. And we've been through that. We've reached the milestone. So the G Corporate have ended their tenure, and we have come out. And three of us thought it's a great idea to continue on the journey because we love working with each other. We worked on projects that we still want to continue. So that was the idea.
Yeah, well, help us a little bit to understand your background, because you've got you showed me the map of your career. It's incredible. But this is an opportunity for you to talk a little bit about your background. Like, where did you grow up? Where were you educated? Because you've been educated internationally. And where did you start your career? So let's hear a little bit about that.
Yes. So when I look back in my life and in my career, it was all about embracing change and learning and growing. What I mean by that is I'm actually born in the UK. My name Eriko means English country girl. Eriko. Eriko ga sato no ko. So I was born in the UK because of my father's job, who, by the way, is a big fan of the Dale Carnegie program.
Yeah, actually, you very kindly brought in.
Yes.
From 1976, your father's Dale Carnegie course textbook,
yes,
minus the cover because it's so old
almost
now.
falling apart.
Almost falling apart. And the quick and easy way to learn to speak in public, also by Dale Carnegie. These are like absolute treasures, classic treasures of your father's own handwritten notes on both of these books too. That's fabulous.
So I wanted to make sure you look at that. So anyway, he had a very international job. So I was born in the UK. And in my childhood and early parts of my life, I lived in 5 different countries, always being a minority in the society. And that was my life. So it was a constant change. I never had the luxury of being in my comfort zone. So this is my childhood. So I went on and studied in the university, political science.
This is in the UK?
In Japan. So
in Japan, okay.
I was born in the UK, spent some time in Australia, and then the latter part of my education was in Japan. I did study in the UK again at university, but it's in and out all the time.
So where did you go to uni here in Japan?
I went to Keio University and Law and Political Science. This was in the late 80s to early 90s. Okay. The Berlin Wall, fell down, and a lot of changes in the global order, like we are facing now. As a political science student, I felt like technology is going to be the national strength going forward. And this is going to be an important area. I felt that way as a political science student. So I started my job at the technology company Sony. at that time, Morita-san was
Very
leading the
prestigious
company.
companies in Japan.
Morita-san was leading a company, very exciting place. I just loved the interview process. I saw many female role models, and I just fell in love with the company. So that's where I started. And I also worked in its European headquarters in Germany, and then France and so forth. And so in my 20s or so, I really enjoyed working in an innovative company in the IT sector. After that, my daughter is actually born in France, and we came back. So I started looking for new jobs, and I had to really focus on building my career and also work-life balance. And that time I started working for Microsoft. It sounded like a good place to be, and also continuing on the technology bit. And that's when I really started focusing on government affairs, which later became my core kind of expertise. What I feel passionate about government affairs is when you are in a technology company, you notice that policy and regulations are always lagging behind innovation. For government policymakers, it's very difficult to keep up with policy, right? So it's a responsibility of tech companies to make sure that there is a good regulatory framework and policy for the society. So I got really interested in that and did that for a while. And then as I did more of the government affairs, then the whole social infrastructure and that bigger challenge kind of came into my sight. And I got really interested in the infrastructure, how we build that with the policy and so forth. This was also, I'm reaching in my 40s, I started to think about leadership and was thinking, where can I go to learn more about leadership? And luckily I had the chance to encounter somebody from General Electric, and GE has been known for a good leadership training, and I joined GE. I really enjoyed having a team, nurturing people. I had the honor of joining a lot of leadership courses, which I enjoyed. So that kind of led me through my career in the leadership side of things. And I also took on more additional responsibility in the industry associations like the American Chamber of Commerce in Japan, or the US-Japan Business Council. So I did a lot of the industrial association work, and that was really helping me broaden my horizon. And so that was my corporate career, all of that 30 years of experience in a quick snapshot.
Very beautifully done, because your career is quite elaborate. But thinking back, when you were with Sony, at some point, I guess, in Sony, you got a chance to lead a team. Was that in Japan, or was it outside Japan, in Germany, or wherever it was?
So interesting you ask that. The first time I got a team was in Germany. And I was still in my 20s. I was the only Japanese in the team. And I had Germans, English, Luxembourg, very international, as you can imagine, in Europe. So I struggled a bit, and I did have some failures there too.
You struggled because there was a language issue. You struggled because you were young. You struggled because you were female. You struggled because it was just extremely difficult. I don't know. Where was the area that was difficult there?
The difficult part was communication. And what I mean by that is I spoke English, fluently at that point. So I had, I didn't think that I would have a communication problem. I had confidence that I can communicate. But communication is not just language, right? And at one time, I noticed something was wrong with the team. They were not very happy about me. I noticed that. At that time, what I was doing is I'll come into the office very early in the morning, because that's the time when the Tokyo is still awake. And I had to talk to the Jigyobu, or the business unit. And then, I'll be in the German office very early in the morning, just myself doing phone calls in Japanese. And then the team starts coming to the office. And then they feel like, oh, what's she doing? It's all in Japanese. They don't know. And I wasn't sharing enough what I was doing. what I need feedback from the team, I was not transparent enough. So people got a little bit worried or concerned that she's coming in when nobody's here, doing something that we don't know. And if something bad happens, it must be that. And, when I sat down with the team and said, what's wrong? They said, all of this, and, you're not sharing enough. It seems like you're secretly doing all these things, which was not true. I was hoping that I'm doing this for the team and doing for the, for the company and so forth. But it was not transparent. So that was the kind of first time I learned about inclusive leadership, how to be transparent, how to build trust.
I guess it's, you're a very enthusiastic employee of the company, coming in super early, working hard, getting a day's work done before everyone else arrives, but it's mistreated as a suspicious activity. So were there any other things that came up in terms of leading the team? Particularly, we talk about inclusivity today, diversity today, but you're actually probably one of the first Japanese managers, really to be dealing with that type of diversity of different nationalities, different backgrounds, different educational strengths and whatever. So you're not just leading a standardized Japanese team, a fairly regimented, and you can predict what's going to happen. So what things did you find challenging about that?
Challenging about leading the Japanese organization?
No, leading a diverse team.
Oh, diverse team. I think, in any organization, you first have to get to know each other and understand the differences. And it's starting from it's good to have a diverse organization and why we need diversity in the organization. It's not just because it's a good thing. It's good for innovation, good for the company. It inspires each other. We can grow and learn from each other. So have that common understanding of why we think it's important to have diversity.
So on that point, you've gone from the contrast of working overseas, a very highly diverse environment, to also leading in Japan, which tends to be a very, everyone's similarly educated, speak Japanese, culturally aligned. Did you actually find that international, diverse workplace was producing ideas, was producing creativity at a different rate to what was happening with the Japanese team, or is it just a different type of creativity?
I think when you have an international team, it's fairly open and transparent. It's easier to get ideas and more innovative approach to what we do at work. But because I'm Japanese, I understand how it works. I always want to make sure that, yes, when you have a Japanese team, when you ask questions, they may not respond to you as you want them to be, or they're not like the international team where they raise hands and say everything they want. They don't do that because it's a different culture they brought up. But it doesn't mean that the Japanese people don't have any ideas or any opinions. It's just they're maybe shy or they have not given a proper opportunity. They need some help to build that environment. But there's no difference in Japanese or non-Japanese of how innovative people are, how much ideas they have. So the leaders or the team leaders have additional responsibility, I would say, to make sure you pull out, realize their potential and make sure that we get that ideas and opinion out of them. And it's up to the leader, not to the team. Because, Japanese team are as innovative and as collaborative and as, fantastic. And I know that. So I think it's just a matter of approach and how you do it.
And after you were working in Germany and then France, etc., you came back to Japan with Sony?
By that time, I have left Sony.
You left Sony.
Yes.
So now you're with Microsoft?
Yes.
Right. So now you're in Japan with Microsoft. You've got a Japanese team?
Yes.
Okay. So were you able to take any things out of your experience of leading these diverse international teams into leading a domestic team of Japanese in Japan? Were there things you could transfer across from that learning?
I think it's interesting you say that, I don't know if there's a similarities, but, as I've learned as a child and also as a working in Germany, how to communicate with people and making sure that we have an inclusive work environment, I've become much more sensitive or alert to the differences even within the Japanese group. When we look at Japanese team, it's homogeneous. They behave similarly, but the danger is they're not all the same. Everybody is different. So really tuning to the differences of the Japanese colleagues, because everybody is different, even if they're Japanese.
Yeah,
so
right.
It's just a fine tuning of my, senses to make sure that I keep on that sensitivity to the individual differences, even if they're Japanese. I don't take it for granted that everybody is the same or will have same ideas.
You mentioned the word transparency before as well with your European teams and the importance it played for you to be transparent with them. But often in Japan, the hierarchy here means it's not particularly transparent. It's transparent from the senior leadership down to the middle managers. But beyond that, it's like I use the metaphor of a big sponge on the top, getting all the information from above, but underneath that sponge is solid concrete and not much goes down. So often senior leaders imagine that the people at the very bottom understand what they're thinking, but often that's not the case because it's not actually being driven down to the very bottom. So did you take anything back into Japan in terms of, were you probably more transparent with your Japanese team than perhaps you would have been if you'd only been managing in Japan, for example, and never been overseas?
I think transparency is, it's interesting you say coming from the top and kind of stops there and doesn't go down. But transparency have to start from the top, meaning, people, so you have to ask yourself, when do you feel like somebody's transparent with you? Okay, because people are comfortable in sharing good news, but people have a tendency not to share bad news. So it should really start from the top of sharing the bad news and earlier in the process. And that's where I think people see transparency being such an important element. The team wants to hear what's happening at the top, the bad news that may come. Otherwise, they just speculate and,
they make up their own bad news.
Yes, which is a dangerous thing. And from a leadership point of view, we want the team to bring up issues earlier before it really, becomes a firefighting exercise. The earlier the problem is brought up to the management, the better we can solve it. So it works both ways. The top has to bring the bad news. When you behave like that, the team will also spontaneously feel safe that we bring up the bad news. So that's how I look at transparency, and we have to do more to make sure that it lives throughout the organization. So that's my approach. I'm not sure what I need to emulate from the European model to Japan, but I think it's universal. That's how we need to approach.
Were you too direct as a leader when you came back from Europe? Because in that environment, as you say, raising hands, issues, questions, challenging leaders, that's all part and parcel of a Western business education. I grew up in Australia, but that's the same thing, So we tend to be very direct. But when I'm in Japan, I have to be less direct. I have to be really much more toned down as a leader. And it's a different approach here. So I'm just wondering, after you sort of had your early education experiences and leadership in Europe, when you came back, your leadership standard may be a little bit different from a Japanese standard only grown in Japan. And so did you find that, I'm a bit too direct here, a bit too strong, I better tone it down a bit, or you didn't find any difference?
I think, I have been brought up in different culture as a child. So I have a tendency to immediately sense this from gesture or language, even if I didn't speak the language. Most of the time when I was a child, I didn't speak a word of English, or when I was in Germany, I speak German. But so I have to really focus on the body language and the gestures. And I sense that very quickly. And so I'm constantly processing that in my mind and making sure I'm tailored to respond to the need of the person. So I would go a little aggressive if Japanese or non-Japanese, the people can accept it. But if somebody is very traditional Japanese, they don't want to be pushed too much. I understand that. So I make sure that I don't push too much, or I take time, not the first meeting, second meeting, third, but maybe 5 meetings. I slowly kind of, open up. And it takes time. I know that because I felt that way, when I was challenged in a foreign society, being kind of aggressive approach. So I think it's also important. I'm always cognizant of the other person, their tolerance level, and continually sensing before I kind of put my feet in or say something, listening and let the other person talk, so you can feel the sensitivity level. That I think that's how I do it. There's no one size fits all. It's always different.
And I guess also, you have the culture of Sony, the culture of Microsoft,
yes,
and then the culture of GE.
Yes.
I mean, they're probably just completely even between Microsoft and GE, 2 American companies, totally different, in terms of their culture, internal culture. So how did you find making the transition from a sort of Sony culture to a Microsoft culture to a GE culture?
So I think I was lucky in a way that Sony is not a traditional Japanese company. It was a very innovative company. I remember Morita-san saying at the first day at work to the nyushashiki, the entry ceremony,
employees, yeah.
He said, if you don't like the company, please leave. Please have fun. If you're not having fun, you should, look for another job. You have to have fun at work. We're going to support you. And all of this message was kind of, wow, it's not the kind of company I thought.
Typical Japanese
So everybody
message,
was, we don't say kacho, bucho, we don't say call them in titles.
Really?
It's always san, Morita-san. Even the manager is called by san. It's always equal. So I was lucky enough to start from that base of being very free, open, and
so inside
friendly.
Sony, if Suzuki-san was the bucho,
Yeah.
people would just call him Suzuki-san.
Yeah.
They wouldn't say Suzuki bucho.
No, never.
Oh,
Even if somebody is a Torishimariaku, and Torishimariaku would just come to my desk, even if I'm first year, second year at Sony, they will come and I say something san to that person, even if it's a Senmu or Torishimariaku. I never stand up or say something and say Senmu or Shacho. Never. It's always san. That was
very democratic.
that was the company policy.
Wow.
And I just don't know any other way. So that was the starting point, which was not the typical Japanese, but it's a big Japanese organization. So if you compare that with Microsoft, Microsoft was a much younger company, and it's a business of software, not hardware. So software is different from hardware. So it's the speed is so fast. You cannot, software always will have vulnerabilities, and you get monthly, patches to update your software. It's nothing is perfect. So you come from, hardware freedom, but now software is much more freer, and nothing is perfect. In this world of nothing is perfect, how do you maneuver? So it was a different, high-speed, very inspiring environment. I learned a lot. And then, as I was getting a bit older, I felt like I probably cannot keep up with this speed.
Wow.
I want to slow down.
Wow.
But I want to slow down a little bit, but also think about leadership. I had great leaders and a great team. I was really honored to have that experience. But if I want to be a good leader, I felt like I was missing something. So that's why when I came to GE, my focus was to learn leadership and how to nurture people. And the speed, although people at GE may think, there's so much change going on, a lot of things are going on, a lot of speed is important. But from my point of view, coming from Sony, Microsoft, then GE, it was much slower.
Oh,
the project takes 5 to 10 years, infrastructure project. And once you're up and running, it takes 50, 60 years to manage a power plant. So it's a very different timeline and dynamics, and the trust you build with customer is very different. So that was a right pace for me.
And GE, because they have their own internal training system for leaders, like do they send you to the training centers in the States, right? So it's very much an American approach to leadership training, right? So I'm wondering how much of that were you able to take and then use in Japan, because your team is Japanese predominantly, not American. So a lot of that American stuff just doesn't transmit into Japan. It's not a perfect fit. So how did you find trying to learn about leadership, but then you're actually got to lead Japanese, and how do you find that balance?
Yes. So you mentioned about the GE leadership training system. So it's a very good system, and every now and then you get nominated to go to Crotonville, which is a leadership training center outside of New York. So it's a real privilege to go there and meet people and spend time with the global team. So that's great. And I would say the global GE team, whether in Japan, whether in Argentina, whether in Europe, Africa, there are common elements to leadership and how you manage the team. So there's an effort to make sure that we share the same culture and the leadership, how leaders should be. So there's a commonality. But it's also true, as you have pointed out, that each country has different people, how people are brought up. The same, transparency or trust or focus, whatever you want to deliver, may have a different interpretation. So, GE would have these training courses that are run locally with Japanese, faculty members, and the Japanese style only with the Japanese employees. So in that scenario, we talk in Japanese, we digest that, and how did that fit into our daily work? So that process is very important. So you have that common asset, the common values, but how does that translate to our culture and our way of doing things with the customers as well? So we do a double down effort to make sure that we digest this, what it means locally, and practice. It's a repetition, practice, keep on going, learning, and making sure we personalize it in our own culture and make it work in our workplace. That's even more important, and we make sure we do that.
Yeah, we noticed that too, because, like this Dale Carnegie course you got here, Quick and Easy Way to Speak in Public from Dale Carnegie. Our base IP is coming from America. It's got to be translated at two levels. One level is culturally into Japanese culture, and the other is linguistically into Japanese that people can understand. But we are constantly saying that approach is too direct for a Japanese context. So we have to change this scenario or change this language to make it more suitable for Japanese and to make that adjustment. But thinking about, you've had a phenomenal range of experience, star-studded companies, fantastic corporate marks like Sony, Microsoft, GE. If you think about what you've learned over the course of your career so far, what have you found has worked well to really engage teams, get them behind the effort?
So I think it's always important to understand the background and culture of the team. So that's the first place where I start to engage with people. And also, let's say when I have the team and I want them to engage, so I need to understand why are they here? What is their purpose in life and at the workplace? Because if you don't understand what their interests are, what they bring to work, why are they here, where they want to be, you can't really engage them. So it really starts from sitting down, person by person, understanding what their personal goal is, career aspiration in that particular point in time in their life. And this is important because, whether in your 20s, 30s, 40s, everybody has different kind of family conditions, health conditions. Some people come to the company because they love the company, or some people come to the company because they love the industry, healthcare or energy or aviation or, IT. So everybody brings different aspiration to work. So unless you really understand what they're looking for, you cannot talk in the same language.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. And you also have to update that too, don't you? Because if you, say you talk about a point in time, if you're talking to someone and then they get married, their life has changed.
Yes.
You had a conversation pre-marriage. Yes. Well, the conversation post-marriage may be entirely different aspiration set, or if they get married and then have children, or their parents are aging and they have to take care of their parents. I mean, at different stages of life, our needs change. And if we think as leaders, well, I've had the conversation, we had that talk, Eriko and I, done. Well, it's an ongoing thing, isn't it? It doesn't stop.
No.
Yeah.
So it's never done. And I think the leader's job is really to be curious about the person on the team, and making sure you take care of them. And, it's constantly moving. So, you would have one-on-one with them, every month or whenever it's needed, but regularly, not more than, a month apart. To make sure that, where we left off a month ago or 2 weeks ago, how things are with work and everything else. And making sure if they have a need, am I responding to those needs? To have a checkpoint, we call it checkpoint. I think these are so important. And, sometimes when people are having issues or problems, they don't really realize them themselves. They are stressed, but they don't realize themselves. So I think as a leader, you need to be constantly monitoring, checking, how they look, how they respond in meetings, if there's any change in attitude or behaviors. You might think, this is different from last week. This must be something going on. So I get curious or I get worried, and I will, reach out afterwards and say, is everything okay with you? And it's also important to make sure that people have different privacy kind of space, right? So I'm kind of the person, I'm happy to talk about my personal things. I open up and, talk about family stuff too. But some people like to do that. Some people don't like to do that. So this again is also tricky, because you need to be sensitive to how much the person is opening up, or how much privacy you need. And if they don't want anybody to intrude into their personal life, you should not do that. And this could be the case for younger people. They have different ideas about having too much talks with managers. So everybody's different, but I think it's when we go back to engagement, you have to know, all these personal preferences, and make it easier for them to engage. So if you are in a big classroom doing a town hall and ask them for questions, of course it's difficult to engage. But if it's in a small group, or if you give the opportunity to submit questions, maybe anonymous ahead of time, that's much easier. I can read out on behalf of somebody and said, who might have wrote this question? Maybe anything to elaborate, anything I missed. And then they said, actually, I wrote that question and this is what I wanted to say. And make it easier for the person to add something rather than starting from a blank sheet of paper.
Make it more
I think there's
accessible.
many ways to lower the barrier of engagement, because we know that it's difficult in an audience for Japanese people, particularly on average, to speak out. So it's up to us.
And the
to
reason
make it,
for that is, why is it difficult for Japanese people in an audience to speak out? Because foreigners have no problem, the opposite problem, they speak out too much. So what's holding the Japanese back?
I think, I think many people may have said this before, but, people are basically shy, or they don't want to make mistake with the, stupid questions, or they just don't want to stand out too much. Deru kugi wa utareru. You don't want to
The
stand
nail
out.
that sticks out gets hammered
You want to
down.
be like, unnoticed. So it's part of the culture or the way we have been brought up and the education. So that makes it difficult for us. But again, I want to make sure that that doesn't mean that nobody has good ideas, or opinions, or viewpoint. So it's up to us to make sure that we discover that in a more friendly environment, and do it one-on-one or small group or written things. And it takes just practice and commitment and repetition. And I have seen over time people start opening up and speaking up. And if you train this, it's just a skill, social skill, and it becomes much easier. And some people who had been very quiet, if you give them some chance to be a speaker or a moderator of something, you help them do that, and they feel like, oh, this is not as bad as I thought. With that little success experience, they feel they overcome the fear and understand how fun it is to do that. It just needs a little bit of help and experience, repetition, and sense of success to get there, and it can be done. I think I've seen many people who have grown out of their comfort zone and be very talkative in leadership positions, and people change. People have the ability to change if there's an opportunity.
And what about ideas? Because you've been in very innovative companies, and when I was growing up in business, the boss would have known every aspect of the jobs. The boss had been in those jobs, had experienced those jobs. And with Japanese, cyclical movement of staff through different general management positions, they know about, the accounting, they know about the export part, they know about, HR, or they move around. So they tend to be generalists and have a good knowledge. But what's happened basically, and you know this because the technology companies you've been involved in, is it's too big and it's moving too fast. And as the boss, you can't possibly keep up. So the boss being the sort of source of ideas as a concept is dead. And really, the boss has got to be able to get the ideas out of the people. So what things have you found works well to get ideas from the people below you, to get their ideas bubbling up?
I think you're absolutely right. So, in the olden days, you would have somebody with a great experience who knows everything. And I have respect for that. I do. But we live in a time when there's, so much uncertainty. The speed of innovation is unimaginable. Those knowledge that we acquired in the past is probably not worthwhile. It's not going to help the climate change or, whatever that we need, AI. So it's a constantly moving. So leaders first have to admit that, I'm new, I'm still learning, I want to learn from you. You tell me what I need to learn, and or maybe give assignment or think about what we can collectively learn, this quarter, next quarter. Let's choose a topic we all learn and share that. Because it's not about how much you know, how much you can share is what's important. So when I had the team, I probably asked my team to spend 20% of their time learning something new. It can be connected to what you're doing now, but it could be totally disconnected with what you're doing now. But learn something new 20% of your time. And I had a team when they were doing postgraduate or PhD, or simply going on a 3 months bubble assignment on another company. And there was no system to allow that. But I thought it's a good thing to do. So I talked to the HR and said, my team is just going to be away for 3 months in this company. And she did that. And it was a tremendous experience. So I think it's important to make sure that you provide that opportunity to learn.
Mm-hmm.
You don't just say, it's good to learn,
Mm-hmm.
but how do you make that happen
Mm-hmm.
in the team, within the working time?
Mm-hmm.
So I also encourage 20% of their time to learn something new and then bring it back, because the value is not just knowing it, it's the value is sharing it. So when we have a weekly meeting, what did you learn? What are you learning? Share it with us. Wow, inspiring. And it's just a continuous cycle of every week. The weekly meeting was about 1 hour, but we just go on and on about what did you learn? That's exciting. And this just goes on, and people feel energized to learn, and this is how we get, how we can solve problems. So I think it's important that we encourage people, and also to make sure that we carve out time to do that. And if, we are living in a very busy time, so you come into the work, you get more things on your plate. Every day you have more things. So the leader's job is to make sure that, okay, you don't have to do this. I'll take care of this. And, so you put this out so you can do this new thing. Because the plate is, you only have 24 hours. And I don't want people to be working overtime or, sacrificing their family time. So it's constant juggle of what you stop doing, so you can do new things. And it's managing the time wisely for that team and person is super important, to make sure that people can still invest in things that they spark their ideas and innovation.
What about trust? What have you found works well in building trust with teams in Japan?
So I think, when you think about building trust with a Japanese team, I think some Japanese idioms may help you.
Okay.
So let's start from, we have it in Japanese, 一緒に汗をかく means you sweat together, literally like sweat. But what it really means in Japanese, it's a selfless devotion, and you roll up your sleeves and work together during the difficult times. That's what it means by 一緒に汗をかく. So even if you're a leader, you go to Gemba or the place where it's happening, and then you roll up your sleeve and you sweat together like, crazy. That builds trust with Japanese, because you sweat together, 一緒に汗をかく. Or, we have a Japanese word, tebento. It's like the handmade lunchbox. Bring your lunchbox. And what this means is, suppose you want to start a new business, new industry. And this really happened, right? When I was at GE. So we wanted to do home health, but we were not in this space. We had to create the market. So we got together with a few companies and let's do this with tebento, like lunchboxes. So we don't actually bring lunchboxes. It means we don't ask for money. We just contribute whatever we can contribute, our time, our resources, and do a little bit of study group, like a benkyokai, in a tebento style, like a lunchbox. So if you have done this with few people, there's a real bonding there and trust. Because I think Japanese people like very bonding. And you also probably heard the word 同じ釜の飯を食う. So eating from the same rice pot. Of course, you can go to the canteen and eat the same, lunch. That's good enough. But I think 同じ釜の飯を食う, eating from the same pot, means you are there with them, living together, be side by side through thick and thin. That means what, 同じ釜の飯を食う. So if you're with the team, you experience all sorts of scenarios. If you're sweating with them, if you bring in your resources, if you sit down with them, difficult times and the good times, and don't run away. And you have this fairy tale of tsuru no ongaeshi, right? So the grateful crane. So if somebody has done good fortune to you, you spend your life and soul paying back to that gratefulness. And that's the tsuru no ongaeshi. And Japanese people feel very strong about giving back if somebody has treated you well in the past. So if a customer has stuck with you during COVID, COVID was a hard experience, but many of the Japanese companies are so loyal that they stick with us, they don't run away, they pay us on time, all these great things because we have a trust relationship. So you don't walk away with this now that it's inflation. Yes, we have to raise prices, and these are all right things to do, but you have to understand it's so difficult in Japan because we have this feeling towards our customer that we pay so much for, we have so much gratitude to them. It's very difficult to communicate. With that sensitivity, you go a long way. So understanding this, I went on a little bit long there, but there's a lot of Japanese way of doing things, and get to know them, understand it, have the team teach you how to do it. And then you gradually build trust. This is how to get business done in Japan. And there's no shortcuts or,
What about culture? What about building a culture? Because you've been a Sony culture, a Microsoft culture, a GE culture. They're quite separate cultures, but they're also, when you're in Japan, you've got the Japanese culture. So what have you found as a leader? Because I think every leader wants to have a certain culture in their environment. I mean, you have the umbrella culture of the corporate, but then you're in your locale, it's Japan, and your team, and you want to have a culture for that team. So what things have you found work well to build culture?
So culture is how you run the business every day, and it's an everyday thing. So culture is not just about having a nice slogan or a fancy poster in the office. We have that, nice to have. We need that, but people don't change the culture because of that. It has to be an everyday thing, and it has to come down to the behaviors. For example, we talked about transparency earlier. So if you want to have a culture of transparency, how do you do that? So, for example, when I became a president of GE, I was probably the first president who didn't have a room. So I would just sit, my desk is in the middle of the floor where everybody's walking. So everybody's walking and there I'm just sitting in the middle. So I get to see people all the time. So that's different. And usually in the past, the president will have a nice room with a different furniture and nice carpets. And in order to get time, although we had a very good open door policy, but the secretary would, you need to go to the secretary to get some time to talk. But in my case, I just sat in the floor. So anybody, and I had 2 chairs, so anybody just can come up and talk to me. And this was pre-COVID, so in 2018, 19. So anybody could just come up and talk to me. And it's important that people see that. So that, it's okay to just walk up and sit down and start talking. It's okay, and without appointment, it's okay. And this could have.
That's quite radical for Japan, I have to say.
Drove my secretary crazy for a bit, but I had to do it. So so when people see that, it becomes everyday thing people can do. And also if I'm too busy meeting customers or going to government meetings and never sitting down there, people think, she's too busy, probably should not disturb her. She's back in the office, but she seems very busy doing all that. So, I cannot just walk up and say anything. I should not interrupt. But I just sit there. I just sit there sometimes, no meetings, and I'm kind of looking around. And I look kind of wasting my time. Like
Hidari Teichiwa. Have a fan in the left hand, like nothing to do.
So, people think, she seems kind of free now. Maybe I can jump in. So,
well, that's interesting, though. I mean, to think like that, for me, like you said, you're out seeing clients or you come back from meetings or teaching, whatever you're doing, and piles of work's waiting for you. And you just bang, get straight into it, and you rope yourself off from everyone because they realize, boss looks super busy, can't talk to the boss now. But you actually had the forethought to create a little bit of openness there to invite people to come.
But because even if you say, transparent, we have transparency, you can tell me anything you want. Please talk to me, but you're never really opening up, you don't give the opportunity for people to come up and talk to you, then you're not doing it. You're not exemplifying it. So I have to just sit there and do nothing. That's the best thing to make sure that, I'm ready to listen, right? So it's these kind of things in meetings, emails. How do you respond to emails? How do you do meetings? How do you spend your time? Do you have a window? Do you just sit there and wait for people to come and talk to you? This kind of everyday thing is so important for transparency and sharing bad news and things like that. So again, another example is, culture of accepting failures. So I learned this lesson, also when I was in my early days of, leading an organization. I would say to the team, it's okay to fail. It's not a big deal. We can always work together. But one of my teammate came to me and said, Asai-san, you said it's okay to fail, but you never fail. And I said, that's not true. I always failed. And sometimes I failed miserably. The truth is, I wasn't sharing my failure. I was kind of, I didn't want to share my vulnerabilities. I had to be a strong leader. That was my kind of prejudice. So after that day, I became much better in sharing my failures and my vulnerabilities to the team. Because I said, it's okay to be vulnerable and it's okay to fail. Then show me. That's what the team wants. So that's the behavior and everything.
And that's difficult for leaders, isn't it? Because often they're promoted over the heads of their peers. We've all got imposter syndrome. We're not good enough for what we're doing. So I have to mask my inabilities to look like I know what I'm doing. I have to look strong when I'm not really feeling strong. I have to look confident, I'm not really feeling confident. And so we are taught to become great actresses and actresses playing a role. And the thought is that if I show my inabilities, my failures, my insecurities, people won't respect me and I'll lose credibility and people won't follow me. However, I think what we find as we get, maybe it's as we get older, I don't know, when we get through that period in our 30s and 40s, maybe, I don't know, where you realise that by being open and opening up a little bit, that people don't stop respecting you. They don't think worse of you. They acknowledge you're a human being too. They expect that, okay, we're not always going to be perfect. So I've found that showing vulnerabilities doesn't become a negative. But I can tell you, it took me a long time as a leader to be comfortable to do that, because I thought that I had to be Superman. And in fact, you realise you don't have to be Superman. But I guess it's also age and stage, I suppose. But it's not. It's easier said than done, I would suggest. That, but it's a good thing to do it. Even I do a lot of writing for blogs and podcasts. I have 6 podcasts a week and 3 TV shows. It's stuff I produce myself. It took me a really long time to admit failures or difficulties or problems in what I was writing, to share mistakes, share failures in my writing, because I thought I had to be perfect. But I think once we get over perfectionism and we realise that people will have empathy, maybe some people will never respect you, whether you're perfect or not, right? You're just out, they don't care. But I think for the vast majority of people, they will be empathetic. So, but it is a hard one.
Yes.
I found that a hard one to do that.
I think it's very difficult, and I know how it feels. I have experienced that personally. And it's sometimes case by case, because if you're managing a crisis, let's say COVID, you have to make decisions and you have to be strong and you have to have courage. And there are times like that in crisis where you have to really lead strong. But most of the time we are living in a much more calm stage, even if we have issues with customers. So I think strong leaders are leaders who say, I want to learn from you. I want to solve problems, so tell me what you know, and I'm here to help. The leader is not about me, it's all about you. So tell me what you're on your mind, how we can work this together as a team. And this approach, I think, is the best to making sure that we can work as a team and get to the right decision and the right answers. That's the only way I can think of. So, I do get similar questions, like you said. When I do a class, they said, "Oh, you talk about inclusive leadership, but how do you balance between inclusiveness and being strong?" It's like you're strong because you're inclusive, and it's just natural. But they feel like being inclusive and kind and always listening is a weak thing, and I get that question, but when I get those kind of questions, I feel like, oh, we have a long way to go because that is not where we're trying to get.
And what about if someone rang up and said, "Hey, Eriko, I've been given this big job in Japan. I'm going to run the organization there. I don't know anything about Japan. I don't speak Japanese." What would be some advice you'd give someone on leading in Japan?
So, I think we've covered this a little bit, but Japan is a somewhat unique culture and background, and people are just as innovative and creative, but it takes time. So, make sure spend enough time at the beginning, let's say 3 months, listening, learning about the person, every one of them, before you bring out your something or ego. Just listen and learn from the team, because it's such an important to build the trust at the beginning, probably much more so in our society. And the other thing is also, Japan is an island country. We are very self-sufficient. So, people are sometimes disconnected with the world. So what, foreign leaders can bring into Japan is the global mindset. And Japanese people appreciate that, what's happening in, the other parts of the world. So bringing that global mindset and also connecting that with where does Japan fit into that global puzzle, and what can you as an individual contribute to that, global trend, is an important conversation. And they feel like, oh, I live in Japan. I thought my work was, this big, and I'm struggling. But it's actually connected to this big cause, whether it's climate change or AI or whatever, global challenges we have. And sharing that common agenda, I think is very important. So there's a lot of, opportunity for foreign leaders to come in and, educate us and embrace us. And, they can do this very successfully, but always start with sensitivity to the culture and building trust at the very beginning.
What about learning Japanese? Should they learn Japanese?
Well, I mean, if you try and learn Japanese, some words, I think it's good. It's good to show that you're trying. But it is such a difficult language. I don't
agree with that.
I don't. And you do a great job, and you are very fluent. But I realistically, if they come for a short term of assignment, in their 40s, 50s, I think it's practically quite difficult to learn Japanese. So it's not the language. It's more of, do you sweat together? Do you eat the same food? Are you there with them when there's tough things happening? And even if after you leave, do you come back and, talk to us? I think it's more of this personal relationship and understanding the culture that really hits, Japanese people's hearts. And it's not just language. Language also helps if you know few words, but it's more of understanding, trying to understand the culture is more important.
Well, we've only touched on a small portion of your many experiences in your long leadership career across some, star-studded companies, but I think we've got to the essence of quite a few topics today. So thank you very much. That was great. And please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.